call on the first individual, and that's Senator Jeff Golden. Welcome, Senator.
Chair Wagner, thank you very much for that introduction. I think you framed it in such a way that I'm almost tempted to just pass the microphone, but not quite. Chair Wagner, Vice Chair Knopp, I'm Senator Jeff Golden, representing District 3, the Medford, Ashland, Jacksonville portion of the Rogue Valley. I really thank you for the chance to come talk to you again about campaign finance reform. I chaired the Senate committee that passed Senate Joint Resolution 18 in 2019. Senator Knopp vice chaired that committee and was a chief sponsor of SJR 18, which became ballot measure 107 in 2020. And as you just observed, Mr. Chair, Oregonians approved it by a almost unprecedented margin, nearly 4-1. More than a few of those Oregonians wonder what we've done with their mandates since then. Well, we've talked very extensively, again, as you noted, Mr. Chair, about campaign finance regulation, and none of that talk has moved us very far. Why is that? After some reflection, I'd like to try and answer out on you. It's not the only answer for sure, but maybe it's one we can do something about. I think we get off on the wrong foot right from the start because the word overhanging this whole discussion is corruption. And that comes straight out of case law. Courts have consistently upheld campaign finance regulation when its purpose is to reduce, quote, corruption or the appearance of corruption, end quote. So that's the legal framework for this whole enterprise. And that word pretty much loses most legislators right out of the gate because we're confident that we're not corrupt. And if you think of corruption as selling our votes for money or personal advantage, our belief is on solid ground. My own years covering and participating in Oregon politics, classic corruption is extremely rare. We just don't trade votes for bags of cash. So let's use a more accurate word and one that doesn't shut policymakers down when they hear it and maybe offers a chance for forward motion. Instead of corrupting, I think of big money in Oregon politics as distracting. It could be that nobody in this meeting and very few of our colleagues has ever reversed their vote, yes to no or no to yes, for a large contribution. What does come up is a certain unspoken question, sometimes on the verge of casting high stakes close call votes. What will my biggest donors think of this? Whether that's a conscious thought or not, if we're fully honest, I think we'd have to say we're familiar with hearing that internal question. In the midst of complex deliberation, even if the question doesn't trigger a full-on flip-flop, it can surely push us back from making courageous, maybe disruptive decisions for public good, which are exactly the kind of decisions it'll take to solve the kinds of problems ahead of us. When you strip all of this down, what we want, what I deeply believe we want, is a system that doesn't fuel the question, what will my biggest donors think of this? A system that's free of that distraction. I want to triple underscore this point. Whatever system we devise, let's make sure there's no room for distractingly large campaign contributions from any entity, any person, any trust, any corporation, any foundation, any union, any religious group, any business association, any fraternal order of anything that has specific stakes in how legislation comes out. Whatever else happens, if we can clear that one hurdle, we'll improve greatly on what we have today. Of course, we'll still have to settle on what constitutes a distractingly large contribution, and honest people will disagree on that. We already have. On Oregon's political landscape, I'd say we enter the distracting zone when a contribution to a House or Senate race breaks into the fairly low 5 figures, or when someone gives 6 figures to a gubernatorial or other statewide race. The bill I'm bringing to session stays below those levels, and I look forward to introducing it. So rule number 1, no distractingly large checks. There are a couple more rules we have to get right. To be credible, our reform can't innately favor any funding coalition or political party. That's another principle that needs more discussion to hammer out specifics. A third essential characteristic is transparency. Let's rate every proposal that comes to the table on how hard it is to follow the money. The answer with much of what I've seen so far is too hard. They allow for a multitude of different funding entities, different membership organizations and rules. In some cases, money can flow through multiple channels before reaching a campaign. I'm worried what that does to the rare opportunity we have right now to lift the abysmally low level of public trust in government. That won't happen if our reform charts out like a Rube Goldberg diagram. If our system makes it hard to understand who's giving how much to whom, it's more likely to increase the cynicism that undermines Oregon than reduce it. With that in mind, the bill I'll introduce strives to make it especially easy to follow the money. The last element of campaign finance reform I'll touch on today is the opportunity to engage everyday Oregonians, people of very modest means, who just don't feel connected to civic life right now. There are two promising ways to increase that engagement. One is small donor committees that can be easily organized and registered with limits on how much an individual can put in and how much aggregated money the committee can then give to a candidate. This has been a bone of contention among us, with some arguing to allow any aggregation of money from different people. You'll give a big advantage to labor unions over other groups and violate the principle that we don't want to give an innate advantage to any particular party. I admit that could happen if we're not careful. When I read proposals that allow organizations to give so much per member, whether or not that member donates to the fund, I don't see fairness. But if we get the rules right, and we can, any group of people with an affiliated interest can have equal access to the benefits of small donor committees. Of course that could be union members. I expect it will be. It could also be insurance agents or realtors or people fighting for abortion rights or people fighting against abortion rights or Second Amendment advocates or Moms Demand Action or Oregon Wild or Timber Unity. It's a very long list. And in every case, you have Oregonians who'd like to have more weight in the system than their modest economic means give them now. Properly designed, small donor committees can be the kind of leveler our reform system needs. Imagine for a moment that our new system allowed only individual donations and limited them to, say, $1,000 to a legislative candidate. Then imagine a race between John from an affluent background and an affluent community and Lucille from an economically marginalized community. John might well be able to collect 200, 300, 400 of those $1,000 checks from his professional colleagues, business associates, his college or university network, maybe his church congregation, his social circle generally. Lucille doesn't have those ties. Maybe she'll connect with a dozen people who can write $1,000 checks. But what she well may have is scores of friends and family who really want to see her in the legislature. They're the ones who can turn small donations, too small for the candidates to spend time seeking in today's system, into meaningful funding. These friends can empower their neighborhoods, churches, parent associations. They can knock on every door within 6 blocks of where they live to tell people they know what it would mean to have Lucille in the legislature and ask everyone for $10 or $20 or $50, amounts that mean little today by themselves, to make it happen. That's Lucille's response to the raft of big checks that John pulls out of his network, and I think it lines up better with what most of us think of as representative democracy. The other tool for making small donations matter much more than they do today is a small donor match, where candidates agree to rigorous campaign finance limitations for a publicly funded match of, say, 6-to-1 for the first $25 of any donation they receive. When $25 effectively becomes $175 in a campaign chest, you've politically empowered people of very modest means far beyond what You generate interest and ignite citizen activism beyond what any reform has done before. I know well that allocating tax dollars to political candidates seriously rubs some people the wrong way. But I also understand that a majority of the world's democracies do exactly that, and that public satisfaction with their system far surpasses ours in this country. It's also true that public financing proposals tend to quickly gain support as people learn more about how they actually work. I'd suggest that public campaign financing deserves a full meeting of its own with smart, knowledgeable people from a range of perspectives, and I urge this committee to find time to do that. It will be worth it. Question we're left with. Will the system we create qualify as genuine reform if it allows high five-figure and six-figure donations from any entity that has a clear focused interest in the outcome of legislation? Could we look Oregonians in the eye and say we've solved the problem of big money's power in politics? Carefully to find an honest answer. Mine is no. That simply wouldn't be campaign finance reform worth the name. The final question might be, how do we want the way we handled this particular challenge to be remembered long after we leave office? What kind of politics did we leave Oregonians when we had the chance? Again, Mr. Chair, sincere thanks for focusing this committee's attention on campaign finance reform and for inviting me to take part. I will be very excited to continue this conversation when the session begins.
Thank you, Senator. I know your passion, expertise, knowledge, acumen is well aligned for the continuing conversation. Your patience with it as well is amazing.
Not sure
I believe
about
Senator Manning